Every day, something incredible happens in a narrow strip of water most people in America have never even seen on a map. Tankers the size of skyscrapers glide through a corridor only about 20 to 30 miles wide, carrying a huge portion of the world's oil. If that passage ever closes, global markets panic, headlines explode, and yes, gas prices in the United States could spike almost overnight. Welcome to the Strait of Hormuz, arguably the most important shipping lane on Earth. But here's the real question: how did this small waterway become so powerful in world history? Let's go way back, thousands of years before oil, before tankers, before modern nations. This region sat at the crossroads of ancient trade routes connecting Persia, Arabia, India, and beyond. Merchants sailed through these waters carrying spices, silk, and ideas that slowly reshaped civilizations. Imagine ancient ships navigating the same waters where massive oil tankers travel today. Pretty wild, right? But hold that thought, because the real drama begins centuries later. Fast forward to the age of empires. European powers suddenly realize something important: controlling trade routes means controlling wealth. Portugal arrives first in the early 1500s and basically says, "Nice trade route you've got there, we'll take it." They build forts, dominate shipping, and turn the Strait of Hormuz into a strategic military checkpoint. But history rarely lets one empire keep control forever. Soon other powers start circling the region like sharks smelling opportunity. Now, quick question: if you were an empire and you discovered a choke point that connects major continents, would you ignore it, or protect it at all costs? Exactly. That's why the strait keeps showing up in global power struggles again and again. Over time, control of the region shifts, local powers rise, colonial influence fades, and the Persian Gulf becomes one of the most strategically watched areas in the world. But then something happens that changes everything. Oil. Suddenly, this narrow waterway transforms from an important route into the economic heartbeat of the modern world. Massive reserves are discovered across the Middle East, and guess where much of that oil has to travel? Right through the Strait of Hormuz. At its peak importance, roughly a significant share of global oil shipments passes through this tiny passage every single day. That means economies, industries, and millions of jobs indirectly depend on ships crossing this narrow stretch of water. Now imagine this scenario: a traffic jam in one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. Sounds like something from a movie, right? Except it's actually a real fear governments talk about constantly. And that brings us to the modern era, where the Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. Because of its location, any tension in the region immediately raises concerns about the strait's security. Over the years, political conflicts, naval patrols, and military exercises have turned this calm-looking waterway into one of the most closely monitored places on Earth. But here's the fascinating twist people often miss. Despite decades of tension and global attention, the strait has remained open most of the time, largely because the entire world depends on it. Countries that disagree on almost everything else suddenly agree on one thing: keep that shipping lane moving. Still, the risk is always there. Every time a crisis happens in the Middle East, analysts and governments start asking the same question again: could the Strait of Hormuz be disrupted? Because if that ever happened, the ripple effects would spread across global markets within hours. And here's the cliffhanger that makes this story even more interesting. Technology, energy transitions, and shifting alliances are slowly changing the way the world thinks about oil and trade routes. Some experts believe the importance of the Strait of Hormuz might evolve in the future, while others argue it will remain one of the most critical choke points on Earth for decades. So the next time you hear about tensions in the Persian Gulf, remember this: a narrow stretch of water thousands of miles away could influence global economics, international politics, and even the price of fuel in your city. And the biggest question is still unanswered. Will the Strait of Hormuz continue shaping world history the way it has for centuries, or is the next chapter about to surprise everyone?